I am just going to go out on a limb here and say that these are coming from grass-fed cows.
Absolutely not. Totally feedlot.
Here we are in my kitchen again.
This is my favorite place to be, actually, is your kitchen. So
Billy just occasionally texts or emails and says, I'm inviting myself over.
So one of these days, I'm just going to show up with my family and dog, and we're just going to all come in and be like, we're here.
Okay.
So
okay. My dog will probably beat up your dog, though.
Yes. That's a good point.
He's not user-friendly yet. Okay. Well, we want to talk about your Green Juju products because these have become some of our favorite products. I have most of them in my cabinet for my own pets. So there's a couple of different lines here. And one of the things that we want to talk about is the sourcing for your products. Let's start down there with the new trainer treats. So first of all, what is in like the Salmon Trainer? Is that whole salmon? Is that just salmon meat? What is that one made of?
Yeah, well, first of all, I love using just fish generally, because when you're talking about salmon and you're talking about small fish like sardines and that kind of thing, it functions like organ meat. So when we're developing this, I like things that are high in vitamin D, retinol, vitamin A, but especially these omega-3 fatty acids. These are about 15 milligrams of omega-3s per treat, and so that can make a really significant impact on your overall diet. So going back to what your actual question was, this is the highest quality wild-caught salmon. So we're catching this, Yes, me and Kelly are going down to the dock and catching every one of these salmon. This is this wild-caught salmon is sort of like an ode to, Green Juju is actually based in Seattle and actually is based in a neighborhood called Ballard, which is right down on the water where all the fishing boats come in that area. We're using the same supplier as like very high-end grocery stores in terms of their wild-caught salmon fillets. So this is just the straight fillet cuts. And basically in most industries, it doesn't matter if you're, say, getting a steak or a salmon fillet, they want it to look a certain way. And so what they do is they take all the fillets that come in and they cut off certain pieces of it. And those pieces are exactly the same nutritionally as the pieces that they don't. It's just about marketing and the human eye.
Having that perfect rectangular fillet of fish.
Yeah, and what we accept. So obviously we are using the other cuts from those. And so this is just a pure part, but this is exactly the same thing you'd find, at your sort of co-op type, organic grocery store.
Very cool. All right, let's move over. What do we have next? Rabbit trainers. So again, is that whole rabbit? Is that just rabbit muscle meat?
So this is another great one where we kind of, since the very beginning at Green Juju, Kelly was always focused on sort of novel proteins as choices, because of the fact you'll notice we don't do, any chicken or anything like that, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but we have always wanted to sort of cater to the most sensitive animals. And so when it came to rabbit, and also I think you might appreciate the cooling aspect of that, in terms of the protein, these are whole rabbits, so whole cleaned, sort of. So imagine, I don't know if any people watching this have seen whole rabbit at maybe a butcher or like the grocery store, but it's basically the whole cleaned rabbit, and it's ground. So it is just the one ingredient, and does contain the bone. So the salmon, there's no bone. Rabbit does contain the bone there, but
clearly it's very finely ground.
You won't actually probably see it, and it's also freeze dried, so it's just a different consistency generally. But it's always nice to, obviously rabbit's very lean, but it's always nice to get multiple cuts. So the thigh is going to be a different nutrition profile from another part of the rabbit, and so that one's also lower in calories, and so who's ever watching this knows their dog or cat better than I do. And so they know some animals you can feed them I find most animals that are on a species appropriate diet, you don't have to watch the calories as
Right.
much, but there are still some of those dogs and cats that if they look at food, they gain weight. And so,
Exactly.
you know, I'm all about calories aren't just calories, but calories do matter,
Yeah.
especially to some animals. So that's one way to go.
And I like rabbit because it is pretty much a novel protein. Although we are seeing more food companies that are making some rabbit-based foods, but when we look at different proteins in general, rabbit tends to be the least allergenic of any protein. So I usually, if we can find a source for allergy animals, I'll usually start with rabbit. Pork is another one that I go to, but I like to start with rabbit. And it's nice to have a single protein treat that's not going to add a whole lot of calories, but used for training, something that can go along with that novel protein diet. So,
Yeah, and
make it happen.
it definitely matters too that those rabbits are actually free ranging and actually engaging in more of a natural lifestyle.
Where does the rabbit come from?
The rabbit actually comes from Spain. So we actually, it's not that easy. So the interesting thing about our company in general is we try to source as many of the ingredients, near wherever the production facility is. There's two of them. So, but when you're getting into meat and different qualities of meat, and is it grass fed? Is it all these things you're looking for in terms of the sourcing? You definitely have to go to other areas. And that one we just, unfortunately, there's a lot of rabbit farms that are not great.
Yeah.
And some of and the other thing with sourcing is too, sometimes you can find like really great ones, but it's a farm.
Yeah.
And that's not really, they're probably already supplying someone else anyway. So that's I think the only meat ingredient that's really outside of the US. And I think the only other ingredient besides that is coconut oil, because that doesn't grow
We
here.
don't
So
make so much of that here.
no.
All right, perfect. All right, we'll move on to bison liver trainers, and I'm assuming these are just straight bison liver.
Yep, these are the old school trainers. This is one of my favorite. Ever since joining Green Juju, this has been one of my favorite treats. If you know me, you know I'm a huge proponent of organ meat, just generally. So the really cool thing about the bison trainer is we actually tested the omega 3 to 6 ratio, and it's not typically a 3 to 1 ratio, which is a grass fed ratio. So we go beyond just saying that it's grass fed and actually can prove that. And that comes from those buffalo eating grass because, as we know, buffalo and bison, wow, bison and cows are genetically made to eat one thing, and that thing is grass. And so um, it really is the difference between feeding a healthy food and an inflammatory food in terms of if you were to grain feed that bison, it would probably be somewhere around like 1 part omega 3 to 17 parts omega 6 or higher,
Yeah.
even up to like 30. And so we're very proud of all of our sourcing. And that's one of the reasons I came to work with Kelly at Green Juju was because I knew that my ethics for my own family and how we eat could be, carried out for all the animals in the country. So we actually have, if you go to our product nutrition page, you can see all the copper listed under each product because it comes like with the general nutrient analysis
Right.
of everything. And we find that ours is lower, obviously, because it's grass fed. So most of the issues that come with liver or just any organ meat is because it's a feedlot animal. So if it's a feedlot animal, it's eating a lot of feed and has a lot of supplementation, you're going to be higher in those things, wherein this is going to be much lower. So people could actually go on and look at um, that level, but ours was like significantly lower, maybe by like half or something like that than the average.
Yeah, because the organ meats like the liver provide so much critical nutrition for our dogs, but people with copper storage disease problems with their pets get really scared off to feed
Yeah.
any sort of organ meat, particularly liver. And I don't think that they need to avoid it overall. I think part of what needs to be avoided is, like you said, the poor quality sourcing for the products that are going into the food, and also looking at food products that have a lot of synthetic vitamins
Yeah,
and minerals
that's a
added
good point.
because they're it's not an exact science, and we don't know how much they're absorbing of those. And sometimes you'll read the ingredient list and it has more than one copper source that's being put into the food, and I think that a lot of them are just too high.
Yeah, and I find that most of problems with things like that are they are actually they can be relevant in cases like you're talking about with maybe copper storage, but I think most of them are just theoretical. A lot of the things we deal with in the pet food industry, in my opinion, is more theoretical. There's a lot that goes into, say, there's a lot of information you can find online about what you should or shouldn't do in terms of histamines in
Right.
food, but I don't think there's ever been a relevant study to show like, oh, this food that has this amount of histamine actually affects the body's histamine level or that aspect of it. So when it comes to high amounts of organ meat, I've been doing that for my entire career and haven't really seen any issues with um, copper or the other thing people sort of have a fear about is too much vitamin D, too much retinol vitamin A because they're fat soluble vitamins. I've never really seen an issue with any of those things. And I think it comes from actual food that's raised correctly versus, you know, in America, we typically tend to ruin every food. So we're like, oh, eggs are healthy? Cool. Let's raise 1,000 chickens in a space this big and feed them garbage. And they're still healthy, right? It's like, no, they're absolutely not.
Right.
So all of those things are dependent on where it comes from. And we definitely, I can say hands down, have the best sourcing in the industry.
Cool. All right, I want to talk about.
I went on my food rant there, so
That's fine.
I
want to talk about your treats, and these are basically training treats as well. So we're going to start over here with the beef red.
Yep.
Is that what we have here? Beef red. So this has beef heart and beef liver, but also has carrots, beets, turmeric. So there's a lot of things that I love about this from a TCBM standpoint. But again, we've got organ meats in here. So we have beef heart and beef liver. And I am just going to go out on a limb here and say that these are coming from grass-fed cows.
Absolutely not. Totally feedlot. Just 100%. Same thing you find in hot dogs at Costco. It's all good. Don't worry. Sorry, I don't mean to put Costco on blast there. So that made me lose my train. Oh, okay. So, well, the cool thing about these, you notice all these different color schemes here. So we kind of call this treat the rainbow to some degree because going between all of these, you're going to get different health benefits. But yeah, it's 100% grass fed beef. And heart there's this big discussion between is heart an organ, is it not? An organ is actually defined as any grouping of cells in the body that performs a function. So by that definition, there's many things that your skin is an organ.
Yep.
Your even some people
your
look at
are an organ.
Fat cells are an organ. So it just depends. But I know what people are talking about. They're talking about secreting organs like liver and spleen and kidney have different nutrient profiles, and that is true. Those are going to be more nutrient dense than vitamins. But heart is double the collagen of muscle meat. It also has a better vitamin and mineral profile. It's a more sort of nutrient dense food. And also, it's great for like feeding like. The cow's heart is made of the same things as your dog or cat, and it's going to be high in nutrients that support that organ. And so, for me, this has been an evolution in the way that, I look at formulation as well. And you say to yourself, the industry standard is sort of taking muscle meat and then heart and then liver and then kidney and that aspect of it. But I said one day, well, why don't we just take out the muscle meat if we can and just do heart to make a more nutrient dense product.
And then the carrots and the turmeric in there are great for resolving stagnation. They're great for circulation. We see so many dogs in particular with liver qi stagnation, which it comes from frustration and leads to anger issues and behavior issues. So this is a really nice natural way to be able to help drain the liver. And you've got some other products that do that really well also. But I just like it from a lot of aspects.
I do want to clarify there. It sounded like I formulated that product. I did not. So I don't want to take that away from Kelly because she came up with this concept. And Kelly is one of the most innovative formulators in the industry. I had a hand in these two, but
Okay.
these were done by her long before I got there. So
All right, we'll work our way down the line. So this is pork pink, correct?
yes.
Pork pink. So this is pasture-raised pork, which is awesome. So this does have some muscle meat as well as the organ meat, the heart and the liver. And then we're adding in parsnips, which are great for draining, beets, great blood tonic, strawberries. That is really interesting. Why strawberries?
Well, so number one, we wanted to add, obviously the strawberries is the smallest amount, but I'm a big fan of feeding berries just generally. Like when my daughter eats a lot of berries, and so huckleberry gets a lot just by virtue of, existing below the height chair. But also, if I'm just in the kitchen doing that. But the other part that was kind of fun was we took a white food and two red foods and put them together, and you can see the colors very pink there. I will tell you the sourcing on the pork. There's a good story behind that. We 7 or 8 years ago, probably, I was having brunch with Kelly long before I worked for Green Juju in Seattle, and because ever since I was inadvertently the first Green Juju customer, we have been friends since then. So we've been friends for many years. So we were having brunch and just chatting, and she said, "What are you going to get?" And I said, "I think I'm going to get this. I think it might have been bacon or something, but I have to see what the farm is first because they listed the farm." I was like, "I have to Google the farm and see if it's ethically, up to my standard." And it was. And so I was like, "Oh, good. I love eating pork products when they're correctly raised." And she called me one day when we were going to do this, and she's like, "I know we can use the farm," because it was the same farm from like many, many years ago. So that was, and pig farming is kind of like near and dear to my heart because I've been around it in a very close manner, and it really matters that they are outside and engaging in natural behaviors and together with other pigs. I mean, when you get into the negative part of pork farming, they're in a pen alone, they can't really move, and so even though we're raising them for food, they still deserve dignity and respect, and they still deserve to, they're we should have, I think, more appreciation for that. So that comes through in this
Awesome.
product as well.
All right, so then we have duck orange, which is duck with bone and the liver. And then we have some beautiful yellow and orange things in here. Butternut squash, carrots, turmeric, fenugreek seed. Why fenugreek?
Well, can I tell you a really funny story about fenugreek seed?
Sure.
It's great, by the way, in terms of its one, it's antioxidant content, but also it's just general. So like if you make fenugreek sprouts and things like that, for your general like plant antioxidants and that kind of thing. But I used to grow sprouts for in I still do kind of inadvertently, but I used to grow sprouts all the time for Lua when she was alive. And one of the ones I started doing was fenugreek a lot. And all of a sudden, and I didn't know this, but fenugreek is actually the flavoring they use in maple syrup flavored things.
Really?
When you smell it, it smells just like maple syrup. So I didn't know that. And so Lewis started smelling exactly like maple syrup all over her body. And I was like, "Do you have diabetes or what is wrong with you?" Like, I don't, and I was kind of freaking out. And then I smelled the fenugreek and I was like, "Oh, so if you're watching this at home and you want your dog or cat to smell like
maple syrup,
feed them fenugreek seeds." But yeah, so a lot of the stuff in here is kind of achieving the same goal through different means. And that's what's important in nutrition generally. So like if you're looking for different antioxidant profiles, you can get the stuff from the fenugreek seeds and the squash, and then maybe you move to a different one. Or they're going to have different consistencies as well. That one's going to be on the softer side. So if you're breaking this up over their food or something.
Or if you have dogs who don't have much in the way of teeth. Actually, my cats love these too. I like those for the softness.
Yeah, exactly.
For those animals who have a little bit more trouble.
But like if you were going to be training and having them in your pocket, the beef or the bison might be better or something. Yep. But and so those actually came out at the same time as our duck bone broth and our golden blend. And so we were kind of we kind of inadvertently released them in the fall, and I was like, it's kind of perfect, with that aspect of it. But
All right. So then we have the Bison Green. I'm a big fan of this one too, because I was talking a little bit about the liver chi stagnation and liver draining down here on the beef red, but this one goes to another step. So it has the dandelion greens and organic kelp, which and kale. So dark leafy greens are really good for liver blood support, and dandelion greens and kelp are really good for draining the liver, but also pushing things through the kidneys. So I would have no problem using these as a treat for a dog that had some kidney disease, because this is actually going to promote flow out through the kidneys. So it for me, it's promoting building blood, which are animals who are having kidney issues. Sometimes they're getting anemic. And so we want to be careful that we're still supporting that, but also promoting that urine flow. So I love that one.
Our bison sourcing is second to none in terms of, it being grass fed, it being ethically processed, which is also a huge part of the game as well, because if you're sourcing animals for food, and you can guarantee that, okay, they're eating the stuff they're supposed to eat, they're engaging in natural behaviors, they're having those relationships with other members of their species, but you also want the processing to be, and the bison is actually field harvested, which means that they don't have to get into a truck and they don't have to get into to actually do that, in the field. And it's very, we definitely try to get into as many of the, much more humane methods. Like a good example that would be, it's interesting because a lot of the pork and poultry producers, because it's cheaper, are moving to, for instance, something called CO2 stunning, which it's fine as long as they do it. I'm fine if it's a money thing and it's cheaper, great. But in that case, the birds just go into either a tent or room and fall asleep and then die in their sleep, and then they're processed afterward. And so I know that sometimes it's hard for people to hear in terms of that part of it, but the reality is things have to die because because we love our dogs and cats and need to feed them appropriately. And so, with the bison is no exception with that. And that was really the first, Just Greens, when Kelly developed the original, Green Juju product, had the bison bone broth in it. And that came from her dog Bailey having a lot of protein sensitivities. And that was one of the proteins that Bailey did really, really well on. And we find that this is, one of our best selling items for that exact reason. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's neutral ish.
Yeah.
It's neutral. Okay, good.
Yep, pretty neutral.
I'm afraid of being wrong about TCM in front of you. So
well, and so when we talk about the warming cooling, if we look down at the beef, you have grass-fed beef, so that's going to be pretty neutral as well. Confinement raised beef, very hot, very inflammatory, not as bad as the heat that we would get from like confinement raised chicken. It's much worse. But bison, are there confinement operations for bison?
not as far as I know.
They don't do that really with them so much.
The problem with grass-fed beef too can be that it's not just, you can actually confine a cow and then feed them like alfalfa pellets, and that is grass-fed beef. So you do want to, exactly. So you do want to make sure that because there's something to be said about, obviously, like if you're working with like a cow dairy operation, they're going to eat, if it's 100% grass-fed, they're going to eat hay in the winter, and you're going to get a different nutritional profile. And the same thing would be true with the meat. There's just going to be a different profile from a cow or a bison actually in a field grazing. Yep. But then also they just enjoy their life. And so that's, one of those.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So then we have salmon blue. This has purple cabbage, blueberries, and fenugreek again. So again, now is this whole salmon with bones and everything? Because the Salmon Trainers were just the fillet meat. Is this the whole?
Yeah, so it's different cuts of. So we're able to utilize things that they're not utilizing in the human industry. So before they do something like, most of the fish actually, most of the fish they in the industry generally, they cut off what they need, and then it goes like fish oil and things like that. But I want to remind people the things that they don't cut off, just like humans don't eat a lot of organ meat, and so there's a lot of organ meat available to us, are the exact same nutritional profile, right? You'd rather have your dog, for instance, if you're going to feed your dog sardines, you'd rather have them eat the whole thing with the head and the brain and the whole deal, rather than just like a fillet piece or whatever, in terms of that part of it.
Right.
And so I want to kind of like make that distinction, because I don't want to come across like, oh, it's byproduct. Well, it is kind of byproduct, but it's a good byproduct.
Exactly.
In terms of that. And so that's where you see just salmon as that ingredient.
So that could be any parts of the salmon.
Yeah, outside of
the main fillet.
Yeah, so
cut.
so the nice thing is you have a choice. You can either do the fillet or the or that cut of it as well.
Right. But this cut, I mean, by using, for instance, fish heads, we're getting so much more nutrition that we don't get just out of that fillet.
Oh, 100%.
Because that's one of the problems with raw feeding, particularly with prey model raw. You need to feed the whole animal.
Yeah.
Not just the muscle meat
Mm-hmm.
or the muscle meat and liver. You really need to be looking at feeding the parts and pieces that most people kind of go, ew.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, and then you have your purple cabbage, which is wonderful for digestive health and supporting the gut lining. And then blueberries are obviously a very dark antioxidant color. Typically in nature, the darker the antioxidant color, the more activity there is there. And blueberries are obviously one of the gold standard items for antioxidants.
Yeah.
And then you have your maple syrup smelling
fenugreek
in there as well. So, and one other note about salmon as well, I kind of mentioned it, but salmon sort of operates as organ meat nutritionally. So again, it's high in the same fat soluble vitamins. It's high in B vitamins. It's high in all those things that I think dogs are generally missing, especially in homemade diets where you kind of do what you're talking about and you do prey model and it's 5% secreting organs. Obviously these are great ways to get more of those in, but salmon is another great way to do that.
Great. And then we saved my favorite for last. This one, first of all, is the first one that I think I ever fed to my dogs, but the Just Greens. And again, this provides so many things from a TCVM and just from a nutritional standpoint. So first of all, everything's organic, which is great, but we've got the dark leafy greens in here, like the kale, that is really good for building blood, the parsley. But then we also have things that are going to drain that liver chi stagnation, get things out through the kidneys. So we've got the dandelion greens, we've got the parsley, and then the nettles for allergies are amazing for decreasing inflammation. For gut health, we've got coconut flour, which is a great prebiotic. We've got organic ginger, which is just amazing. For any animals that people tell me their pets have acid reflux or they're waking up in the morning, with that early morning vomit of bile, adding ginger is usually the key to solving that.
Yeah,
it's just so good for digestion. Turmeric is really good for blood flow, for anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer. I mean, there's just so many reasons. This one kind of covers everything. Increasing circulation for those dogs, or you could use it for cats too, but when we have like heart failure and we're not getting a good flow of the blood, a lot of these things that are in here are going to really help promote circulation and pushing the fluids out in the direction that they're meant to go. So I love this product.
And the nice thing is it's very convenient as well. And there is something to be said. Whenever you do any sort of processing on food, there's going to be negatives and positives, right? So obviously, if we could live in a world where all of our dogs ate never frozen, just fresh, animals, that would be great. But that we don't live in that world, and so we have the 3 frozen ones, which kind of contain their innate moisture. But there are actually studies that show that certain plant foods are better to retain their nutrition by freeze drying as opposed to just straight freezing. And I think that has to do with the time it takes to do that, typically in terms of that. And so I think there's sort of, I don't ever want to say one is ultimately better than the other, because there's always going to be, different positives.
Well, we do know that for some vegetable matter, when you cook it, you actually release more of the vitamins that are trapped inside. And for our dogs who are not great at breaking down cell walls, having something like this where it's been freeze dried, it's been finely chopped, they're going to get the nutrition out of that they need. So.
Yeah, and I will say too, it's important. I think this is an important point. We actually do. I'm gonna pick this up. I hope I don't mess up your shot here. The important thing is we actually do make this. What I mean by that is we don't just order powders of these things, because once you start doing that, you start getting in the territory of, is it that thing? Because
right.
in supplements, there's a lot of that. And so we actually do get all of those vegetables in that are almost all, locally sourced in the Pacific Northwest, make just greens, and then freeze dry it at the facility. So that's why you'll see there's like chunks in here. There's bigger things when it comes to that. And that is sort of means a lot to me, because I'm a very distrusting person when it comes to brands in general for my own, everything I use, that kind of thing, as well. So I'm more of a prove it to me person. You're talking to someone who, if I switch to a new probiotic, I grow it in milk to make sure it actually works. Before I use it.
Good idea.
Yeah, it's a good medium. And so this actually comes in 1.5 ounce, 1.75 ounces, and 5.5 ounces. And this will actually rehydrate to one 15-ounce container of our frozen. And the larger one rehydrates into three 15-ounce containers.
Okay.
And the price is about the same, so you're not paying more.
Okay, that's interesting that you would say that. So do you recommend rehydrating it and then keeping like that rehydrated product in the refrigerator? Because I always just take that, add water, and then that's at the time of
I would just
feeding.
You can just do kind of whatever works for you. If you're let's say you're rehydrating a freeze dried food or something like that, maybe I would mix them together, and then just, if you're letting that rehydrate, but just adding it right at the time is totally fine as well. It just depends on.
And I really like rehydrating it with bone broth.
Yeah, and bone broth is like one of my favorite things to rehydrate with generally, because in essence, it doesn't matter if it's, a lot of people use these treats, for instance, they put them on food, they might add some moisture back to it. But in essence, when you get bone broth, you're leaching the nutrients out of the bones and marrow and those parts of animals. And so it's good to add those back in, especially if you're doing something that's, it's almost, you could argue, like, you're retaining all the vitamins and minerals here. It's almost like arguing that it would be better for dogs and cats to freeze dry something and then add bone broth back to it as the moisture versus its own innate moisture. That's kind of an interesting, I'm just, going off the top of my head here.
You're getting extra nutrients from the bone broth.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. Love them all.